Why Egypt's flood story about Sudan is a loud noise and misses the facts. For years, Cairo has tried to turn every Blue Nile headline into leverage on Ethiopia. The late September Sudan flood was the latest hook, but a Blue Nile flood is first and foremost a Sudan emergency. Egypt sits far downstream behind Lake Nasser. Sudan issued the alerts. Sudan routed the water through Roseras and Sennar. Sudan's river towns took the hit. Yet most of the shouting came from Cairo. Let's walk through what was claimed and what the record shows. How GERD is actually judged day by day. Under the 2022 Ethiopia and Sudan agreement, GERD is operated within a level band and checked every day by two simple tests that protect Sudan. 1. A minimum continuity flow delivered to Sudan, about 300 met/3 which is 25.9 million met/3 per day. 2. A cap on how much total release may change from one day to the next, about 250 to 350 million m3 per day. Those are the field standards, not social media slogans. What peak history looks like before GERD? Ethiopia's Ministry of Water and Energy put on the record a 93-year Sudan series. Before GERD, the Blue Nile sometimes exceeded 800 million cubic meters per day in August, and more than 750 million cubic meters per day in September. That is what raw, unregulated peaks look like. In 2025, regulated GERD releases averaged about 154.7 million m3 per day in August, and about 472 million m3 per day in September. Peak shaving is the point. Were the outlets closed? No. Here is what running turbines look like in water units. I shared control room screenshots from late September, showing multi-gigawatt output in the morning and higher in the evening. Power equals flow times head. Converting that to water is straightforward. Example with typical GERD head near the top band. Assume a hydraulic head of approximately 120 meters and an efficiency of about 90%. Then, 2.5 gigawatts on the grid implies about 204 million m3 per day through turbines. 4.8 gigawatts implies about 391 million m3 per day through turbines, or think in per turbine terms at typical rating and head. 1375 MW unit under those conditions passes roughly 30 to 33 million m3 per day. 8 units at useful load pass roughly 240 to 265 million m3 per day. 10 units pass roughly 300 to 330 million m3 per day. These are standard hydropower physics. You cannot show multi-GW generation while claiming all outlets were closed. Turbines were working and passing water. Claim by claim, with the receipts claim 1. September releases were 80% above natural. Their own historic table puts the September mean near 428 million m3 per day. September 2025 averaged about 472. That is roughly plus 10%, not plus 80. This is basic arithmetic. Claim 2. Late September doubled the normal 367, so it was man-made. The 367 figure is a long-term average for the last 10 days of September, not a legal ceiling. In wet years, crest days exceed the mean. This is why the agreement uses a daily ramp limit, rather than a rule that late September must equal a 40-year average. Claim 3. GERD must keep a permanent empty flood pool. Many storage hydropower plants operate within an operating band with daily continuity and ramp limits, rather than a permanently empty zone. That is how GERD is coordinated with Sudan under the agreement. If someone insists GERD has a binding clause that orders a fixed, always empty pool, they need to quote it. None has been produced. Claim 4. Blue Nile exceeded 750 for 3 days, therefore Ethiopia dumped water. Sudan's 27 September notice does state that the Blue Nile inflow exceeded 750 million m3 per day for the third consecutive day. That is a border inflow reading, not a log of GERD gate positions. The same notice lists Rosera's discharge above 650 and Sennar's above 600, with multiple stations reporting. That is a basin crest being routed by Sudan's dams. To prove a dump, you need 4 synchronized records for the exact dates: GERD lake level, turbine discharge, spillway discharge, and the border gauge. Without that quartet, dump is a headline, not evidence. Claim 5. The White Nile contribution is limited. Sudan's own warnings that week flagged high water on the Blue Nile and the White Nile and named Atbara and Mainstem stations. Jebel Alia on the White Nile issued an emergency appeal. This was a multi-river flood. Leaving out the White Nile is cherry-picking. Claim 6. A scientific operator would flatten August and September to 315 million m3 per day. That is spreadsheet hydrology. Real operators regulate day-to-day operations inside the ramp limit, match grid needs, and coordinate with Sudan's dams. Crest days will be higher than a 2-month average. Averages are not caps. Claim 7. Using the main spillway proves emergency dumping. A gated main spillway is in place to pass controlled crest flows. Emergency spillways are the rare ones. Opening the main gates near the crest is a regular, controlled operation. Claim 8. GERD failed its purpose. It did not protect from floods. Flood protection here has 2 tests that matter to Sudan. First, do regulated peaks sit below the old wild crests? Second, are day-to-day steps kept within the ramp limits in the agreement? Pre-GERD crests often exceeded 750 to 800 mm². Regulated September averaged in the 400s. If you want to claim failure, point to a day that breached the ramp limit. Claim 9. September carried 50 billion cubic meters. That number is a well-known annual figure at the border, not a monthly value. Mixing periods and units is a classic headline error. Why is the noise out of Cairo so loud? It is not about the Sudan flood data. Sudan's bulletins already named the multi-river crest and showed their own dams routing it. The loud chorus from Cairo is a manifestation of political pressure. If you repeat a crisis narrative enough, you hope to force a new, binding agreement that rewrites Ethiopia's natural rights, 14 years of the same script. The flood did not give them a legal lever. The 2022 Ethiopia-Sudan agreement already sets the day-to-day guardrails that protect Sudan in flood season. That is the practical cooperation that matters on the ground. Closing strip away the noise, and the flood story reduces to 3 things: Sudan's notices, the daily rules in the 2022 Ethiopia and Sudan agreement, and basic math. On those, the Egyptian talking points do not hold. 1 mm3 shot day, 11.574 m3 vs. Use the units, and the numbers stop lying.